Hello everyone. So I'm going to try my best not to get too steeped into negativity here. But overall, every time I discuss whitelist things, config things, things that are used to maintain sixes, there's a lot of people who don't play sixes and aren't really interested in it either, who have some very strong opinions about it. So this is such a broad topic that I have talked about here and there. Obviously, when I look at my comments, not everyone is going to have seen those videos. And not everyone who seems to reflect the same opinions also have the same opinions in a complete sense. You may see similar things being said here and there that are coming from different people from different perspectives, but yada yada. So I'm going to try to focus in on just weapon bans specifically. Some of the arguments I see there, some of the kind of non-arguments I see as well, because admittedly a lot of what I see aren't actually arguments, but anyway, just kind of talk about it, because the idea that something that the developer includes in a game might be worth banning in a format is absolutely in no way unique to TF2 whatsoever. And other communities have to deal with this as well. I'm going to bring a lot of examples to competitive singles in Pokemon, because they have a lot of similar discussions about stuff like that. And from what I understand, there's also people who are just kind of against the idea of things being banned in general. I think a good place to start is literally just why even ban anything ever? And it's quite simple. You can maintain a more fun and more interesting, more competitive metagame as a result. It's very easy to understand. I don't think that there is any objective... there's no objective good to just keeping things as similar to what the game was, quote-unquote balanced for in general. I don't think that there should be an expectation that TF2 is meant to be played in any one way or the other, just because it's there are some people that think that if you're not playing TF2 as no restriction 12v12, then you're playing it wrong, which is an absolutely ridiculous idea. That's no different from telling competitive Melee players that they need to be able to play on all the different stages and they need to play with items on just because that's technically the default settings of the game. It's on the face of it ridiculous, right? Of course, things can be changed. And as a community, I don't think there's anything wrong with if, the majority of people don't want a certain aspect, then you don't play with it. If you consider, for example, a sleep clause in Pokemon, it is on the face of it, while it has since been programmed in to literally not work, on the face of it, it is designed as a mutual agreement, actually. Is if something's asleep, I'm not going to click another sleep move, right? So I don't think it's any different that we have a config that doesn't allow, a certain unlock, for example, let's say the Vaccinator. It's no different from, the community at large or both teams, agreeing, hey, we're not going to use this thing. And I don't think that is wrong at all. But yeah, that's, pretty straightforward. The idea that something can be ban worthy or something can be banned and it's okay for a community to agree to not play with something is fine. That's acceptable. If you don't agree with that, then you won't agree with anything else I say. Sorry. Maybe you still enjoy my voice and want to fall asleep to it. That's fine too. So that being said, let's look at some more specific examples probably. Let's look at some of the non-arguments, because people like to assert that, just get used to whatever thing, which, again, is kind of a little ridiculous. But I also want to point out that it is not an argument, right? If you think that, for example, let's say the Wrangler should be allowed in sixes, saying, just play with it and you'll get used to it or something to that degree is not an argument about the merits of this weapon, how it fits into the metagame, how it would change things, what it would actually be like to play with this thing. None of those are even being considered. And to be fair, a lot of these arguments come from people who don't play the format, so I'm not trying to just be like, oh, well, you don't play, so you have no idea. But to some degree, like, if you can't actually provide evidence for why it would be, you know, healthy or why it would be acceptable to include, then like you're at a position where you just can't really make a reasonable argument for its inclusion, right? And there was another point I wanted to make on that. Yeah, to some degree, I understand that it can be frustrating to just be like told that if you don't play the format, then you shouldn't have an opinion, which I don't necessarily think is true. You can have your own opinions, but it's just not going to be like an argument. If, you know, there's no evidence provided for any one way. When like these discussions happen within the community, there's 100% arguments, like actual arguments being made about why something is worth including or not. Where, like, I see in my comments, for example, someone talking about how the like someone saying, oh, the lock and load should like not be banned or whatever, because people should just get used to it, right? Which again, not really an argument, an opinion, sure, and you can respect the opinion. And someone replied to that being like, talking about it in terms of spam, like risk versus reward for spam, and that the lock and load it's too much reward for not enough risk. In addition to things about, like, you know, how much attention is demanded just to dodge it and whatnot, which you can agree or disagree with that, but at least it's an argument, right? At least it's, you know, presenting it in such a way that is a lot easier to understand and a lot less just a matter of opinion. Although you can have opinions about what is too much or too little or whatnot. Again, you will never see the entire community agree on weapon bans outside of the obvious stuff, like not even Natasha, honestly. You can find people that would advocate for pretty much, you know, any weapon. But, yeah. So I do appreciate when there's actual arguments being made rather than just, like, get used to it. And, man, I keep skirting around it as well instead of actually talking about the get used to it thing. Because, sure, is it true that if you include broken elements in a metagame, then people will get used to it and the metagame will in some sense adapt? Yeah, absolutely. It's no different than if, for example, in Gen 7 OU, you included Mega Rayquaza. People would get used to it, for sure. That doesn't mean that it should happen or that there's any objective good for it happening. And the idea that you should include broken elements because eventually things might stabilize or whatever, or people would get used to it, is potentially true, but that doesn't mean that's a good thing. Because I would argue that including broken things or things that just aren't fun, things that people at large, the community at large, the people actually playing the game, don't want to play with, then all you're doing is making your format or your game or whatever less enjoyable, for really no other reason than pleasing people who a lot of the time aren't even interested in the game to begin with, mind you. So yeah, the idea that banning things makes for a more interesting and positive metagame overall is true. That absolutely can happen. So it's not necessarily ridiculous that competitive players might want to do that at times. What else? There's definitely a lot to talk about because I see a lot of random comments here and there. I suppose I could talk about like maintaining the meta in quotations. There is something else that I will get to, which I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I definitely understand where they're coming from, because it's easy to look from an outside perspective and be like, okay, well, let's use the reserve shooter as an example here. And reserve shooter is like, man, thank God that thing is banned. That weapon is so horrible to play against. In my opinion, terribly designed, and just counters a really fun aspect of the game, right? So, using that as an example, right now, the quote-unquote meta for, let's say, a stalemate situation on a second point would be a team might pressure and usually sack a soldier to try and force the other med, because there's no strong advantage to straight up push off of. If you try and get through a choke point on even Ubers, even players, and just straight up push through, then you're likely going to lose players and your team will die, and you're going to lose the point you already have, and you're going to be at a big disadvantage. So you want to do a less risky play and, you know, poke and prod, pressure to try and convert your generally neutral position into an advantageous one. Very simple. But bombing a soldier is a very important element of this. Now, the reserve shooter completely shuts that down, because now your bomb, which is the most common and like accessible aggressive option that a team has, is bombing soldiers. That is now completely off the table, because anyone with a reserve shooter, well, the other team's soldiers likely, with a reserve shooter are just going to completely shut that down, right? So does banning the reserve shooter maintain the meta in the sense that you are making active decisions to preserve bombing as a tool? In a sense, yeah, sure. I can agree with that. Does that mean it's a bad thing? No, it's a fantastic thing, because if you just have a completely other situation, or you have a reserve shooter meta where I don't even know what you would do to try and break stalemates. It would probably be a lot more sniper stalemates, maybe more Uber exchanges. Overall, the game would be slower. The game would be less enjoyable for the people that play it. So why would it be included? I have yet to see an actual argument for that, because if you treat maintaining the meta in quotations as a objective downside, then sure, it makes sense. But I don't see it as an objective downside necessarily. And I think there's a lot of... It gets used very nebulously as well, of like weapon bans at large are to maintain the meta, which it's not necessarily the case so much as we don't want a completely worse version of the game to take over, I guess. Because you have to understand, it is a competitive game mode that we play, meaning people do what they do to win. And if there are better options, then they will be used, right? If you have, for example, another broken weapon, we'll present the Mad Milk, right? If you have the Mad Milk unbanned, scouts will use the Mad Milk and it will be very centralizing. And overall, competitive players just don't want to really play with that. On top of the fact that Scout is already such a broken class that giving him even more broken unlocks would be a little ridiculous. So yeah, maintaining the meta is something that can happen in very specific examples, I suppose. But you have a game mode here that is over 15 years old and still going strong, still healthy, like player numbers, still insanely fun. So I don't think that throwing away fun elements for less fun elements just to please people who want to see things unbanned is reasonable. Another argument that I see, and this is an actual argument, so credits for that, but I see it a couple times. I saw it today, actually, in reference to the Mad Milk, talking about how, like, you know, Scout has all these banned secondaries, and if you unban some of them, then, like, it would kind of keep each other in check, right? Because you can't have the Criticola and the Mad Milk and the Pocket Pistol all equipped at the same time. I also see this argument in reference to the Reserve Shooter and the Base Jumper, which, as an aside, I had no idea the Base Jumper had shooters like it does. Legit, I remember when this weapon came out, and people were like, oh, it's fun, whatever, like, just floating around. And that functionality hasn't really changed at all. I guarantee that if the Base Jumper actually, and this, people are going to get mad at me anytime I talk about the Base Jumper, of course, because for some people who just hate sixes in general, it's because some of these weapons got changed to try to, you know, accommodate the whitelist or whatever. This is a whole discussion within the community as well, because a lot of people just don't even care about the whitelist at all and don't see that it needs to be changed or in line with the casual scene, whatever. Maybe that'll be the topic of its own video someday. But I guarantee if the Base Jumper released with the stats it has now, no one would think that it's a useless weapon like some think it is today. It's just that there was a better version of it that people knew about. And since that's no longer the case, it's kind of just like, it feels like something was taken away from them. Where the base jumper basically does the same thing it always did, right? It's just a little bit worse for the strafing, and you can't redeploy it. Which, overall, those aren't, like, integral to the functionality. Whatever. If I talk about the base jumper too much, people are gonna need, like, blood pressure medication or something, apparently. Alright, I'm being a little uncharitable. I'm being too sarcastic. I do want to be genuine. But, yeah, this was an argument I heard in reference to the base jumper and the reserve shooter, which is like, why have the base jumper banned when unbanning the reserve shooter, like, suddenly base jumper is no longer a problem because you actually have a way to deal with, you know, those floating soldiers or whatever. That is true. And it is also true in the case of Scout that unbanning something like the Mad Milk means that a weapon like the pocket pistol or the Criticola or what have you wouldn't get used at all because they would just, the milk would get used instead. So yeah, that's true, but there's like there's a logical flaw here, which is that playing with the reserve shooter sucks, as I've already talked about. No one wants to do that. No one wants to do it for the sake of having the base jumper, which wouldn't really even get used anyway. So why have a weapon be unbanned and completely unused just to include that broken element that no one wanted in the first place, right? Yeah, it doesn't actually hold up because, again, these, you know, extremely broken weapons are banned on their own merits, and I can't think of any examples that are like a complex kind of web where, you know, it's like a broken checks broken sort of deal where they kind of hold each other in check. I don't think that's really the case with any of the unlocks. I think it's, generally speaking, you know, the reserve shooter is banned because it's just stupid and broken, and any other bans that might overshadow should be judged on their own merits, because including this terrible weapon that makes the game less fun for everyone involved is kind of a non-starter, to be honest. Was there anything else? I don't know if there is. Yeah, I think the vast majority of what I see is just like kind of nebulous disgruntlement and displeasure at the idea that weapons are even banned to begin with, and that, you know, if you include everything, oh yeah, there is. I think the one thing I should close off on is, if you are genuinely interested in a competitive TF2 metagame where there aren't bans and different whitelist changes or whatever, things like that in general, by all means, that exists, and there's no restriction 6s that you can play. 100%. So it's not that 6s players are imposing a way to play the game for others. It's that we are agreeing on a way to play for ourselves, and if you prefer a different format to play the game competitively, and that's something you're interested in, it already exists, and you are free to play that. But generally speaking, no restriction 6s is extremely unpopular. There isn't a league for it or anything. There's just the odd cup here and there, and most people who play it just kind of troll around and don't take it too seriously. Because again, there's just not that same genuine interest, because, believe it or not, a lot of the bans and whitelist changes and class restrictions and everything like that makes the game more enjoyable to play. And that's why the game is so fun and has lived for so long, right? On top of all the stuff about TF2 that makes TF2 fun. But 6s would not live if you could have 2 medics, I don't think. Yeah, I genuinely think that. Because just something as simple as knowing the state of Ubers, this push wouldn't be able to exist if the other team had 2 medics, because we know it's ad beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's something that only that we only know because they have 1 medic, right? For example. I've talked about the class restrictions in general before, and I could briefly reiterate that, like, Demo is obviously restricted to 1 just because, you know, he's the perfect door holding class, and if you can hold every door with a Demo, that's kind of broken, so only 1 Demo is a little more balanced. Medic, of course, because of the state of Ubers. Ubers being that centralizing mechanic that you get to play off of and makes everything work, actually. Only being one medic is like such a wonderful thing that allows you to kind of manipulate the game and whatever. It's probably the best class restriction. And then everything else that's like limited to one, like heavy engineer, it's just for defending last. Makes it way too easy. And we like to maintain a balance there as well. And I think sniper is restricted to one. Who really cares? It doesn't really matter that much, but sniper is annoying to play against, so whatever. But yeah, we were trying to... here I go on tangents anyway. Yeah, that's generally speaking the kind of, arguments against a lot of the arguments and opinions that people have about unlocks. I genuinely do think that if people were interested in these metagames without restrictions or whatever, feel free to try that. No one is stopping you. No one is telling you how to play the game that you enjoy. No one is telling you you have to play sixes either. So if you aren't interested whatsoever, then that would be a nice favor to return, to be honest, of don't tell people how to play a format that you're not interested in. Because again, it's decisions we make for our game to make it more fun, generally speaking. And if you have countering opinions and you're a person who plays the game as in sixes, then by all means you can offer those opinions and we can have those like in community discussions that we have about every weapon, to be clear, because yeah, there's people that are pulling for and against pretty much every weapon. It's not just some monolithic thought of like, fuck this stupid gun, let's ban it or whatever. I'm probably ranting too much. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm sure the comments are going to be a dumpster fire, but whatever. It is something that I kind of have to get off my chest, I suppose. And yeah, we'll continue with some more positive stuff in the future. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.